The moment Katherine Owen stepped off the dusty stagecoach into the blistering Texas heat of Loveland, she knew her life would never be the same, though she could not have imagined it would nearly kill her within the first week. It was June of 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the small cattle town nestled in the rolling plains west of Fort Worth. Katherine clutched her worn carpetbag tighter, her throat parched and her muscles aching from 3 days of travel. She had left St. Louis with nothing but the clothes on her back, $40 sewn into her petticoat, and a burning determination to escape the suffocating expectations of her aunt's household. At 22 years old, she had finally saved enough from her seamstress work to strike out on her own, answering an advertisement for workers at the Double Bar Ranch. The posting had promised fair wages and honest work, though it had not specified what kind. Katherine did not care. Anything was better than another year of her aunt's endless lectures about finding a suitable husband. She asked directions from a weathered shopkeeper and began the 5-mile walk to the ranch, ignoring his warning that respectable women did not show up unannounced seeking ranch work. The road stretched endlessly before her, shimmering in waves of heat. Her high-collared traveling dress, suitable for St. Louis society, felt like a woolen prison in the Texas summer. Sweat trickled down her spine as she walked, her leather boots raising small clouds of red dust with each step. By the time Katherine spotted the ranch buildings in the distance, her vision had begun to blur at the edges. The main house, a sprawling structure of weathered wood, sat surrounded by corrals, barns, and bunkhouses. Dozens of cattle grazed in the distance, their lowing carried on the hot wind. She forced herself to keep walking, to maintain her dignity as she approached what she hoped would be her new home. A tall man emerged from the largest barn, leading a magnificent chestnut horse. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his surroundings, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his work shirt. Even from a distance, Katherine could see he was younger than she expected for a ranch hand, perhaps close to her own age. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his sun-bronzed forearms were bare where he had rolled up his sleeves. Katherine tried to call out to him, to ask for directions to the ranch owner, but her throat was too dry. The world tilted sideways and she stumbled. Her carpetbag fell from nerveless fingers. She reached out for something, anything, to steady herself, but found only empty air. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the ground rushing up to meet her face and the distant sound of running footsteps. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Cool water on her lips, strong arms supporting her. A deep voice, rough with concern, saying words she could not quite grasp. Katherine blinked, trying to focus, and found herself staring up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. "Easy now," the voice said, and she realized it belonged to the man from the barn. He had carried her into the shade of the ranch house porch and was kneeling beside her, holding a tin cup of water to her lips. "Drink slow. Not too much at once." Katherine obeyed, the cool liquid like salvation on her parched tongue. As her senses returned, she became acutely aware of several things at once. The strength of the arm supporting her shoulders, the clean scent of leather and sage that clung to him, and the mortifying realization that she had fainted like a helpless child. "I am sorry," she managed to croak, trying to sit up on her own. "I did not mean to cause trouble. You have worked enough for today," he said firmly, keeping his arm around her shoulders when she swayed. "Actually, you should not have been working at all, walking 5 miles in this heat dressed like you are going to a church social." His tone was not unkind, but it carried an authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed. Katherine studied him more carefully now. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw darkened by a day's worth of stubble, and those remarkable green eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a slightly roguish appearance despite the obvious concern in his expression. "I came seeking employment," Katherine said, straightening her spine despite her weakness. "I have $40 and a strong back. I can work." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite read. "You walked from town, in this heat, without water." "I did not realize it would be so far or so hot." She felt foolish admitting it, but lying seemed pointless given her current state. He shook his head, a mixture of exasperation and what might have been admiration crossing his features. "What is your name?" "Katherine Owen." "And you are?" "Xavier Ward. I am the foreman here at the double bar." He helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow. "Come on. Let me get you inside where it is cooler, and we will talk about this employment you are after." The interior of the ranch house was indeed cooler, with thick walls that kept out the worst of the heat. Xavier led her to a rough-hewn table in what appeared to be a large common room, and brought her more water along with a plate of cold beef and bread. Katherine wanted to refuse, to maintain some dignity, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. "Eat," Xavier said, his tone brooking no argument. "Then we will talk." As Katherine ate, Xavier sat across from her, his green eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She tried to focus on the food, on the blessed coolness of the water, on anything but the way his presence seemed to fill the room. "The ranch owner is Thomas McKenna," Xavier said finally. "He is in Fort Worth this week on business. I manage the day-to-day operations, oversee the hands, coordinate the drives." "What kind of work were you expecting to do here, Miss Owen?" Katherine swallowed her bite of bread carefully. "The advertisement said the Double Bar Ranch needed workers. It did not specify what kind." "I can cook, clean, so keep books. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Where are you from?" "St. Louis. I lived with my aunt after my parents died. She runs a boarding house." Katherine saw no need to mention the constant pressure to marry one of the boarders, a widowed banker twice her age with wandering hands and stale breath. Xavier leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "St. Louis is a long way from here. Texas is not like Missouri, Miss Owen. It is harder, rougher. The work is back-breaking, and the heat alone can kill someone who is not prepared for it. You nearly learned that today." "I learn quickly," Katherine said, lifting her chin, "and I have nowhere else to go." The honesty of that last statement hung between them. Xavier's expression softened slightly. "McKenna has been talking about hiring someone to help with the household. His wife died 2 years back, and he has been trying to manage with just old Charlie doing the cooking for the hands. The place could use a woman's touch, organization." "Can you really cook for 20 men?" "20." Katherine's eyes widened, but she nodded quickly. "Yes. My aunt's boarding house often had 15 or more. I can manage. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would stay in the small cabin behind the main house. It is not fancy, but it is private and secure. You would cook 3 meals a day for the hands, keep the house clean, and probably end up doing mending and other tasks as they come up. The work is hard, the hours are long, and the men can be rough around the edges, but they are decent enough. I will not tolerate disrespect." His eyes hardened on that last point, and Katherine believed him completely. "When can I start?" Xavier actually smiled at that, a slow curve of his lips that transformed his serious face into something altogether more dangerous to her peace of mind. "How about tomorrow morning? You are in no condition to do anything else today except rest. Let me show you to the cabin." He collected her carpet bag and led her out the back of the house to a small structure set apart from the other buildings. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with a single chair, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A rag rug covered part of the wooden floor, and thin curtains hung at the single window. "It is not much," Xavier said, setting her bag on the table. "It is mine," Katherine replied softly. "That makes it enough." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Xavier cleared his throat and stepped back. "I will have Charlie bring you some supper later. Rest now. Tomorrow will come early." After he left, Katherine sank onto the bed, every muscle in her body aching. She should have felt afraid, alone in a strange place with no one to turn to if things went wrong. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with a certain green-eyed foreman who had caught her before she hit the ground. The next morning came before dawn, announced by a rooster's crow and the sound of men's voices as the ranch came to life. Katherine dressed quickly in her oldest work dress, a simple brown cotton that had seen her through countless days in her aunt's kitchen. She braided her long, dark hair and wrapped it around her head, pinning it securely out of the way. Her reflection in the small mirror over the washstand showed a serious young woman with determined gray eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose that no amount of lemon juice had ever managed to fade. The kitchen in the main house was larger than she expected, with a huge cast iron stove, long work tables, and shelves lined with supplies. An older man with a grizzled beard and a pronounced limp was already there, working at the stove. "You must be Charlie," Katherine said. He turned, squinting at her with rheumy eyes. "And you must be the girl who near about died yesterday. Xavier said you would be taking over the cooking. Cannot say I am sorry about that. My knees are not what they used to be, and standing over this stove all day is killing me." Despite his words, his tone was friendly enough. "I appreciate you showing me where everything is," Katherine said diplomatically. Charlie did exactly that, walking her through the stores of flour, dried beans, salt pork, and other staples. The ranch kept chickens for eggs, and there was a smokehouse with hanging meats, a springhouse for keeping things cool, and a garden that looked like it needed tending. By the time the hands started filing in for breakfast, Katherine had biscuits in the oven and was frying up bacon and eggs on the massive stove. The men were exactly as Xavier had described them, rough around the edges but decent. They ranged in age from boys barely old enough to shave to weathered veterans who had probably been working cattle since before Katherine was born. They eyed her with curiosity, but kept their comments respectful, probably because Xavier sat at the head of the table, his mere presence a reminder of expected behavior. Katherine served the food efficiently, making mental notes about portions and preferences. Some men liked their eggs runny, others wanted them cooked hard. She would learn, would adapt. This was her chance to prove herself, to build a life on her own terms. "These biscuits are lighter than Charlie's," one young cowhand said hopefully. "No offense, Charlie." "None taken," Charlie called from where he sat in the corner, enjoying his own breakfast. "I never claimed to be a baker." Xavier caught Katherine's eye across the room and nodded once, a gesture of approval that sent a warm glow through her chest. She turned back to the stove quickly, annoyed at herself. She was here to work, not to moon over the foreman like some silly girl. The days that followed fell into a punishing rhythm. Katherine rose before dawn to start breakfast, cleaned up after, prepared lunch, cleaned up after that, started dinner, and then fell into bed exhausted only to repeat it all again the next day. In between, There was laundry, mending, keeping the house clean, and tending the garden. Her hands, soft from sewing work in St. Louis, developed blisters and then calluses. Her back ached constantly. She fell asleep each night the moment her head touched the pillow, but she refused to complain, refused to show weakness. She had chosen this path and she would see it through. Xavier watched her with those penetrating green eyes, and she refused to let him see her falter. 3 weeks into her employment, Thomas McKenna returned from Fort Worth. He was a man in his 50s, tall and barrel-chested with a full gray beard and kind eyes that still held shadows of grief. He shook Katherine's hand with genuine warmth and thanked her for taking on the household duties. "Xavier tells me you have been doing excellent work," he said. "The men seem happy, and the house has not looked this good since my Clara passed. I am grateful to have you here, Miss Owen." "Thank you, sir. I am grateful for the opportunity." McKenna nodded, then turned to Xavier. "We need to talk about the drive. The cattle are ready, but I am hearing troubling reports about raiders between here and Dodge City." Katherine went back to her work, but she could not help overhearing their conversation. The ranch planned to drive 1,000 head of cattle north to Kansas in August, a journey that would take the better part of a month and require most of the men. It was dangerous work, made more so by the outlaws who preyed on such drives. That evening, as Katherine was finishing the dishes, Xavier came into the kitchen. Most of the men had gone to the bunkhouse or into town, and the house was quiet except for the sound of her scrubbing. "You should not work so late," he said, leaning against the door frame. "These dishes will not wash themselves," Katherine replied, not looking up. "They could wait until morning. Then I would have twice as many to do." Xavier pushed off from the door frame and crossed to where she stood. He took the dish from her hands and set it in the basin. "You have worked enough for today, Katherine. You work yourself harder than I work the hands, and they are paid to break their backs." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her pulse quicken. She looked up at him, suddenly very aware of how close he was standing, of the way his eyes had darkened in the lamplight. "I am paid too," she said softly. "I earn my keep." "You earn it twice over," Xavier said, "but you are going to collapse again if you keep this up, and I will not have that on my conscience." "Is that an order from the foreman?" "It is a request from a friend." His voice had gentled, and he reached up to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was achingly tender, and Katherine found herself leaning into his touch before she could stop herself. "Xavier," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. He seemed to understand anyway. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I have been trying to stay away from you," he admitted. "Trying to keep things professional. You work for this ranch, and I have no right to complicate that. And if I want it complicated—" The words escaped before Katherine could think better of them, but she found she did not want to take them back. Xavier's eyes blazed with something fierce and hungry. "Then we are both in trouble," he said, but he was lowering his head even as he spoke, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted. Katherine did not want to pull away. She rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when his lips touched hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened into something more urgent. Xavier's arms came around her, pulling her against his solid warmth, and Katherine's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "This is a bad idea," he murmured. "Probably," Katherine agreed, but she was smiling. "McKenna will not like it. He has rules about fraternization. Then we will be discreet." Xavier pulled back to look at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. Discreet, in a ranch house full of nosy cowhands who have nothing better to do than gossip. "We will manage," Katherine said firmly. Then, more softly, "unless you do not want to." "Oh, I want to," Xavier said, and the heat in his voice left no doubt about his sincerity. "I have wanted to since the moment I saw you collapse in the yard, all proud and stubborn and determined not to show weakness. I have wanted to since I watched you wake up and immediately apologize for fainting. I have wanted to since I saw you face down 20 hungry men with nothing but a plate of biscuits and sheer grit." Katherine felt her cheeks warm at his words. "I was terrified that first morning. I know. I could see it in your eyes, but you did it anyway." He kissed her again, softer this time. "That is what makes you extraordinary." They began courting in secret, stealing moments together when they could. Xavier would find excuses to come to the kitchen after the other men had gone to bed. Katherine would walk out to check on the chickens and somehow end up in the barn where Xavier was working. They talked for hours, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Katherine learned that Xavier had grown up on a small ranch in southern Texas, that he had lost his parents to fever when he was 17, that he had worked his way up from a simple ranch hand to foreman through sheer determination and skill. He was honest, hardworking, and surprisingly well-read, with a small collection of books in his room that he treasured. Xavier learned that Katherine had been orphaned at 15, that her aunt had taken her in more out of obligation than love, that she had spent 7 years feeling like an unwanted burden before finally saving enough to escape. She had dreams of one day having her own place, a home that was truly hers, where she could make her own choices. "You could have that here," Xavier said one night as they sat on the porch steps, the stars brilliant overhead. "McKenna is fair. If you wanted to save your wages, build something of your own eventually." "Is that what you want to do?" Katherine asked. "Build your own ranch?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think so. But lately, I have been thinking more about building a home than building a ranch." "There is a difference." Katherine's heart swelled at the implication in his words. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Yes, there is." July melted into August, bringing with it the final preparations for the cattle drive. Xavier would be leading the drive north, taking most of the hands with him. They would be gone for at least 5 weeks, possibly longer if they ran into trouble. Katherine tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong, the dangers that Xavier would face. The night before the drive was set to begin, Xavier came to her cabin. It was risky, flagrantly so, but neither of them cared anymore. Katherine opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand, his expression serious. "I needed to see you," he said simply. Katherine pulled him inside, closing the door behind him. They had been careful until now, stealing kisses but going no further. Tonight felt different, charged with the knowledge of their impending separation and the dangers that lay ahead. "I will worry every day you are gone," Katherine whispered as Xavier pulled her into his arms. "I will come back to you," he promised. "I swear it, Katherine. I will come back, and when I do, I am going to ask McKenna for permission to court you properly. No more sneaking around. I want everyone to know you are mine." "I am already yours," Katherine said, and kissed him to prove it. That kiss led to another and another, and when Xavier finally left hours later, slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Katherine lay in her narrow bed, her body still humming with the memory of his touch, his whispered words of love, the careful tenderness he had shown her. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm, and allowed herself to hope for a future she had never dared dream of before. The ranch felt empty with most of the men gone. Katherine, Charlie, McKenna, and 3 older hands who had been left behind to maintain the property rattled around in the sudden quiet. Katherine threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, using exhaustion to keep the worry at bay. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, reorganized the pantry, put up preserves from the garden, and mended every piece of clothing she could find that needed attention. The weeks crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every night, Katherine lay awake imagining all the terrible things that could happen. Stampedes, river crossings gone wrong, outlaws, accidents, illness. The list was endless and terrifying. Finally, in mid-September, a rider came with news. The drive had been successful. The cattle had been sold in Dodge City for a good price, and the men were on their way home. They would arrive within the week. Katherine spent those final days in a fever of preparation, cooking all of Xavier's favorite foods, making sure everything was perfect for the men's return. She told herself it was just part of her job, but Charlie saw through her and gave her a knowing wink that made her blush furiously. The day they returned, Katherine heard the commotion from the kitchen and ran outside despite herself. The hands rode in dusty and exhausted but triumphant, whooping and hollering. Katherine scanned the riders frantically, her heart in her throat, until she spotted Xavier near the back of the group. He was thinner than when he had left, his face darkened even further by the sun, but he was whole and healthy in here. Their eyes met across the yard, and the smile that broke across Xavier's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He swung down from his horse and strode toward her, and Katherine forgot about propriety, forgot about discretion, forgot about everything except the overwhelming need to touch him, to assure herself he was real and safe. She met him halfway, and Xavier caught her up in his arms, lifting her right off her feet. He spun her around once before setting her down, his hands framing her face as he kissed her thoroughly, right there in front of God and everyone. Wolf whistles and catcalls erupted from the hands, and when Xavier finally released her, Katherine saw that everyone was grinning, even McKenna. Her cheeks flamed, but Xavier just laughed and kept one arm firmly around her waist. "I told you I would come back," he murmured into her hair. "You took your time about it," Katherine replied, but her voice shook with emotion. McKenna walked over, still smiling. "Xavier, I think you and I need to have a conversation." Xavier straightened, though he did not release Katherine. "Yes, sir." "I want to ask for your permission to court Miss Owen properly." "I figured as much," McKenna said dryly. "Though I will admit I did not expect quite such a public declaration. How long has this been going on?" "Since before we left," Xavier admitted. "I know I should have asked first, but I could not help myself. Katherine is unlike any woman I have ever met. She is strong and brave and stubborn, and I love her. I want to marry her with your blessing." Katherine's breath caught. He had said he loved her in private, but hearing him declare it so openly in front of his employer and the other men made it feel more real somehow. McKenna studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "You have my blessing, Xavier. You are a good man, and you have earned your happiness." "Miss Owen, you have been a blessing to this ranch. If Xavier makes you happy, then I am happy for you both." "He does," Katherine said softly. "Very much." The hands cheered again, and the rest of the day was a celebration. Katherine cooked an enormous feast, and the men ate and drank and told stories of the drive late into the night. But through it all, Katherine was intensely aware of Xavier beside her, his hand occasionally finding hers under the table, his eyes constantly seeking her out. Later, after the others had finally gone to bed, they walked out to the horse corral together. The night was cool and clear, the stars spread out overhead like diamonds on velvet. "I meant what I said," Xavier told her, pulling her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I want to marry you, Katherine. I know we have not known each other long, but what I feel for you is real. I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Katherine turned in his arms, looking up into his face. "I want that too. I came here looking for work and freedom, and I found so much more. I found you." Xavier kissed her tenderly. "When? I will wait as long as you need, but I will not lie and say I am a patient man." Katherine laughed. "Neither am I. What about next month?" "That gives us time to make preparations to get a license." "Next month," Xavier agreed. "Though I warn you, I am not sure I can wait that long to make you truly mine." "You already have me," Katherine said. "You have had me since the moment you caught me when I fell." They were married on the first Sunday in October, in the small church in Loveland with the whole ranch in attendance. Katherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric that McKenna had given her as a wedding gift, a beautiful cream-colored silk that she had never imagined owning. Xavier wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaven, and when he looked at her walking down the aisle, his eyes held such love that Katherine felt tears prick her own. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with a thoroughness that made the hands hoot with laughter, and the few town ladies in attendance fanned themselves vigorously. McKenna hosted a reception at the ranch, with more food than Katherine had ever prepared at once, and music from a fiddler brought in from town. They danced until Katherine's feet ached, until the stars wheeled overhead, until finally Xavier pulled her away with whispered promises that made her blush and tingle all over. They did not go far for their wedding night, just back to Xavier's room in the main house, which was larger than Katherine's cabin and would be their home until they could build something of their own. Xavier carried her over the threshold, kicking the door shut behind them, and set her down gently. "My wife," he said wonderingly, as if testing out the word. "My husband," Katherine replied and reached up to cup his face. "I love you, Xavier Ward." "I love you too, Katherine Ward," he said, and kissed her deeply. What followed was tender and passionate, a claiming and a giving all at once. Xavier was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt only pleasure. And when they finally came together completely, Katherine felt as if she had finally found where she belonged, safe in the arms of this good, strong man who had caught her when she fell and loved her for exactly who she was. The months that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. She continued to work in the ranch house, but now Xavier was there with her every evening, holding her close, sharing his day, listening to hers. They talked about their future, about the house they would build, about the children they hoped to have someday. Winter came to the Texas plains, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. The ranch work slowed somewhat, giving everyone a chance to rest and recover from the busy summer and fall. Katherine and Xavier spent long evenings by the fire, reading together or simply enjoying each other's company. It was in late January that Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally confiding in Xavier one night as they lay in bed. "I think I am with child," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it herself. Xavier went very still beside her, then rolled over to face her, his eyes searching hers in the dim lamplight. "Are you sure?" "Fairly sure. It has been 2 months now, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings." She bit her lip, suddenly nervous. They had talked about children, but in abstract terms someday. This was very real and very soon. Xavier's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly. "A baby," he breathed. "Katherine, we are going to have a baby. You are happy?" She asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said fiercely. "You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a family, a reason to build something that matters. I cannot wait to meet our child." The pregnancy progressed well. though Catherine's morning sickness in the early months was brutal. Xavier hovered worriedly, bringing her ginger tea and dry toast, holding her hair back when she was sick, and generally being wonderful even when she snapped at him for fussing. By late spring, her condition was obvious, and McKenna insisted she stop doing the heavy work. He hired a young woman from town, Susan Martin, to help with the cooking and cleaning, freeing Katherine to focus on preparing for the baby. Xavier threw himself into building their house with single-minded determination, working every spare moment to make sure it would be ready before the baby came. The house rose steadily on a plot of land that McKenna had sold them for a very reasonable price, within sight of the main ranch but far enough away to feel private. It was not large, just 3 rooms to start, but it was solid and well built, with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. Xavier carved their initials into the lintel over the door, and Katherine cried happy tears when she saw it. They moved into their new home in July, and Katherine spent blissful days setting up their household, making curtains, arranging furniture, and preparing the cradle that Xavier had built with his own hands. She felt ungainly and huge, her belly round as a melon, but Xavier seemed to find her even more beautiful pregnant. He would place his hands on her stomach to feel the baby kick, marveling at the life they had created together. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon, just over a year after Katherine had first arrived at the Double Bar Ranch. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Katherine thought she might die from the pain. But Xavier was there throughout, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. Finally, just as the sun was setting, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. The midwife cleaned him off and placed him in Katherine's arms, and she stared down at the tiny red face in wonder. "He has your nose," she told Xavier, who was looking at their son with an expression of absolute awe. "He has your chin," Xavier replied. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Thomas Ward after Katherine's father and McKenna, who had been so good to them both. Little James was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's green eyes. Xavier was a devoted father from the start, walking the floor with James when he cried at night, changing his diapers without complaint, and generally acting as if his son had hung the moon. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic with a baby but filled with joy. Katherine would bring James to the ranch house in the mornings, working with Susan while James napped in a basket nearby. Xavier would ride in for lunch and spend half his time cooing at his son, much to the amusement of the hands. As James grew from infant to toddler, Katherine found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter, Emma Grace, arrived on a cool spring morning with much less drama than her brother. She had Katherine's dark hair and a temperament to match Xavier's steady calm. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Xavier proved himself so valuable that McKenna eventually made him a partner in the ranch, giving him a percentage of the profits and more say in the operation. The house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and a third child, a son they named Daniel, arrived when Emma was 3. Katherine watched Xavier with their children and marveled at how far they had both come from that first day when she had collapsed in the yard. He was patient and loving, teaching James to ride, reading stories to Emma, carrying Daniel on his shoulders as he did his rounds. He still looked at Katherine with the same heat and love he had shown on their wedding night, still stole kisses in the kitchen when the children were not looking, still held her close each night, and whispered that she was his whole world. The ranch prospered under Xavier's management and McKenna's ownership. They survived droughts and harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices and the occasional outbreak of disease. Through it all, Katherine and Xavier faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. When James was 10, Emma 7, and Daniel 4, Katherine found herself pregnant one more time. She was older now, 33, and this pregnancy was difficult. She tired easily and felt constantly uncomfortable. Xavier worried, but Katherine assured him she was fine, that this was simply how it was with fourth children. Their youngest daughter, Clara Rose, named for McKenna's late wife, was born during a thunderstorm in late October. She was tiny but fierce, with Xavier's red hair that neither of the other children had inherited and Katherine's gray eyes. From the moment she drew breath, Clara had the entire family wrapped around her little finger. McKenna, who had become like a father to both Katherine and Xavier, doted on all their children but seemed particularly taken with little Clara. He would visit their house often, bearing gifts and sweets, playing with the children and regaling them with stories of the old days. When Clara was 5, McKenna fell ill. It started as a cough but rapidly progressed to something more serious. Katherine nursed him as best she could, but on a cold December night he passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family he had built at the Double Bar Ranch. His will left the ranch to Xavier, who had been like a son to him. It was a staggering gift and a heavy responsibility. Xavier struggled with the weight of it at first, but Katherine reminded him that McKenna had chosen him for a reason, that he had more than earned this legacy. Under Xavier's ownership, the Double Bar continued to thrive. He ran it much as McKenna had, with fairness and integrity, and the hands remained loyal. Katherine continued to keep the books and help coordinate the household operations, though now they employed several people to handle the actual cooking and cleaning. Their children grew up learning the ranch business from the ground up, working alongside the hands, learning responsibility and the value of hard work. James showed a natural talent for working with horses and eventually took over the ranch's breeding program. Emma surprised everyone by showing more interest in the business side of things, and Xavier began teaching her to manage the books and negotiate deals. Daniel loved the cattle work and dreamed of leading his own drive someday. And Clara, the baby, seemed to have inherited her father's gift for reading people and situations, often mediating disputes among her siblings with wisdom beyond her years. Katherine would sometimes stand on the porch of their home, watching Xavier work with their children, and marvel at the life they had built together. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, lean years, moments of fear and doubt. But through it all, they had faced everything together. Their love the foundation on which they had built not just a home but a legacy. On their 20th anniversary, Xavier surprised Katherine with a trip to San Antonio. They left the children with Emma, who at 17 was more than capable of managing her younger siblings, and spent a week alone together for the first time in years. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and spent long hours just talking and being together without the demands of ranch life and children. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sun set over the city. "Coming here, marrying me this life," Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Never, not for a single moment. Why would you even ask?" Xavier shrugged, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "You gave up so much. You could have stayed in St. Louis, found a different kind of life. Sometimes I worry that you feel trapped here, that you wanted more than what I could give you." Katherine took his hands in hers, making him look at her. "Xavier Ward, you listen to me. I came to Texas looking for freedom and I found it. Not in living alone or building something by myself, but in building a life with you. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, children, purpose, partnership, and most of all, love. A love so deep and true that it still takes my breath away when you look at me. I would not trade a single day of our life together for anything. Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I love you so much, Katherine. More now than even that first day when I saw you collapse in the yard and thought you were the most stubborn, beautiful woman I had ever seen. I love you too, Katherine whispered. Always. They renewed their vows in the hotel chapel that week, a private ceremony with just the two of them and the priest. It felt right, recommitting to each other after 20 years of marriage, after all they had built and survived together. When they returned home, the children greeted them with a surprise party they had organized themselves. The whole ranch turned out to celebrate, and Katherine looked around at the faces of people she loved, people who had become her family, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path her life had taken. The years continued to pass. James married a sweet girl from town and gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named Xavier. Emma shocked everyone by falling in love with a lawyer from Fort Worth who had come out to handle some business for the ranch. They married and moved to the city, though they visited often. Daniel took over managing the cattle operations, proving himself as capable as his father. And Clara, at 17, was courting the son of a neighboring rancher, much to Xavier's consternation. She is too young, Xavier grumbled one evening as he and Katherine sat on their porch watching the sunset. She is the same age I was when I came here, Katherine pointed out, and I turned out all right. That was different, Xavier argued. How? Because you were not my baby girl. Katherine laughed and kissed his cheek. She is not a baby anymore, my love. They grow up whether we want them to or not. Xavier sighed and pulled her against his side. When did we get old, Katherine? We are not old. We are seasoned. I have gray in my beard. It makes you look distinguished. You have lines around your eyes. From laughing at your jokes, Katherine said. I earned every one of them honestly. Xavier turned to look at her, his green eyes still as bright as they had been when they first met. You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. And you are still a charmer, Katherine said, but she was smiling. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of cattle lowing and men's voices. The ranch was alive around them, continuing as it had for decades, built on hard work and love and the determination of two people who had found each other against all odds. You remember that first day? Katherine asked softly. When I collapsed in the yard. Every detail, Xavier said. The way you looked in that ridiculous traveling dress, sweating through the fabric. The terror in your eyes when you realized you were falling. The stubborn set of your jaw when you woke up and immediately apologized. I thought you were the handsomest man I had ever seen, Katherine admitted, even through the haze of heat, exhaustion, and embarrassment. I thought you were magnificent, Xavier said, foolish and brave and determined. I knew right then you were going to turn my world upside down. Did I? In the best possible way. He kissed her softly. You have given me a life beyond anything I ever imagined, Katherine. You and our children and this ranch and every single day we have spent together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the part where you had to tell McKenna we were courting, Xavier laughed. Even that, though I was terrified he was going to fire me on the spot. He loved you like a son, Katherine said softly. He would never have done that, I know. We were lucky to have him. Lucky in so many ways. They watched as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding night, the births of their children, and every moment of joy and sorrow in between. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet, the work of the day done, ready to begin again with the dawn. Clara came running up the path, her skirts hiked up immodestly, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Papa, Matthew asked me to marry him and I said yes." Xavier groaned and Katherine laughed, pulling her youngest daughter into a hug. "Tell us everything," she demanded. As Clara chattered excitedly about proposals and wedding plans, Katherine caught Xavier's eye over their daughter's head. He was shaking his head ruefully, but his eyes were soft with love and acceptance. Their baby was growing up, starting her own story, just as they had started theirs so many years ago. Later, after Clara had gone inside and they were alone again, Xavier said, "Another wedding. Another child starting their own life. It is what we raised them for," Katherine said, "to be independent, to find their own happiness. I know, but I will miss this. All of them under one roof, our family complete." Katherine took his hand. "Our family will always be complete, Xavier. It just keeps getting bigger. Grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, our legacy continuing." "Our love continuing," Xavier corrected. "Yes," Katherine agreed, "that most of all." As if on cue, young Xavier's cry drifted from the main house where James and his wife were staying for the week. They heard James's voice soothing the baby, and Katherine smiled. "It never really ends, does it?" Xavier said. "The cycle of it all. Babies crying in the night, children growing, falling in love, starting over." "No," Katherine said contentedly. "It never ends, and I would not want it to." They sat together until the moon rose high overhead, talking quietly about the past and the future, about their children and the ranch, about all the small moments that had added up to a lifetime of love. Finally, they went inside to their bed, the same bed they had shared for over 20 years, and held each other close. "Thank you," Xavier whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Katherine asked. "For collapsing in my yard that day. For being too stubborn to give up. For choosing me, this life, everything." Katherine smiled against his chest. "Thank you for catching me when I fell, in every possible way." "Always," Xavier promised. "I will always catch you," and he had, Katherine thought as sleep claimed her. For over 20 years, through every challenge and triumph, every joy and sorrow, he had caught her, supported her, loved her with a constancy that had never wavered. They had built something extraordinary together, not just a ranch or a family, but a love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in their children and grandchildren. A testament to two people who had found each other in the vast Texas wilderness and chosen to build a life together. The years flowed onward like a river, steady and sure. Clara married her Matthew in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch, and Xavier walked her down the makeshift aisle with tears in his eyes. Daniel took a wife 2 years later, a practical woman from a neighboring ranch who fit into their family as if she had always been there. Even Emma and her lawyer husband returned from Fort Worth, deciding ranch life suited them better after all, and bought property adjacent to the double bar. Xavier and Katherine grew older together, their hair silvering, their steps a little slower, but their love never diminishing. They were grandparents many times over now, and the ranch echoed with the laughter of children playing, just as it once had with their own. On a warm spring morning, as Katherine was helping with the breakfast cleanup in the main house, she felt suddenly dizzy. She reached out to steady herself on the table, and Xavier was there instantly, his arm around her waist. "You have worked enough for today," he said firmly, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. Katherine looked up at him and smiled. "I am all right, just moved too quickly." "Nevertheless," Xavier said, leading her gently outside to the porch. "Rest, the work will still be there later." They sat together on the bench Xavier had built years ago, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. James was teaching one of them to rope a fence post. Emma was walking with her youngest, pointing out different flowers. Daniel was in the distance, working cattle with his sons. Clara was hanging laundry while her daughters helped, singing as they worked. "We did well," Katherine said softly. "We did," Xavier agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever think about that first day? What would have happened if I had not gotten off that stagecoach?" "Every day," Xavier said honestly. "And I thank God every day that you did. You changed my life, Katherine. You made it worth living." "You saved mine," Katherine countered. "In every way a person can be saved." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching their legacy unfold before them. The ranch continued to prosper under their children's management. The land they had worked so hard to maintain would pass to the next generation and the one after that. But more than the land, more than the cattle or the buildings, what would endure was the love they had built this family upon. Years later, when Xavier was in his 70s and Katherine approaching 70 herself, they would sit on this same porch and tell their grandchildren about the day they met. The children would listen with wide eyes to the story of how Grandma Katherine had collapsed in the yard, and Grandpa Xavier had caught her, how they had fallen in love despite trying to keep it secret, how they had built their life together from nothing but hard work and determination and love. The story would be passed down through generations, becoming part of the family lore, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes collapsing from exhaustion could lead to being caught by the very person meant to hold you up for the rest of your life. But that was still to come. For now, on this warm spring morning, Xavier and Katherine sat together and watched their family, their ranch, their whole world spread out before them, built on the foundation of a foreman who had caught a falling woman and told her she had worked enough for the day, who had seen her strength and determination and stubbornness, and loved her for all of it. "I love you, Katherine Ward," Xavier said, as he had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "I love you too, Xavier Ward," Katherine replied, as she always did, as she always would. And that love, born in the Texas heat on a dusty ranch, nurtured through years of hard work and joy and sorrow, strengthened by partnership and respect and deep abiding affection, would endure as long as the Double Bar Ranch stood, a testament to two souls who had found each other and chosen, every single day, to keep choosing each other forever. Their love story became legendary in Loveland and the surrounding ranches, told and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. The young people would hear it and sigh, hoping to find love like that themselves. The old-timers would nod knowingly, remembering Xavier and Katherine in their prime, the way they had looked at each other, the way they had worked side by side to build something that mattered. When Xavier finally passed at the age of 78, after a full life lived on his terms with the woman he loved by his side, Katherine held his hand and told him she would see him again. She lived for 5 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried pieces of the love story she and Xavier had written together. On her last day, with Emma holding one hand and Clara the other, Katherine looked around at the faces gathered around her bed and smiled. "Tell them," she whispered. "Tell them about the day I fell and your father caught me. Tell them that love like that is possible, that it is worth fighting for, worth working for, worth everything." And they did. They told the story at her funeral, at family gatherings, to each new generation born into the Ward family. The story of Katherine Owen, who had stepped off a stagecoach looking for work and freedom, and found instead a love that would span decades and change countless lives. The story of Xavier Ward, who had caught a collapsing woman and discovered his whole future in her gray eyes. The Double Bar Ranch continued for generations after them, still prospering, still home to the descendants of Xavier and Katherine Ward. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the sun was setting over the Texas plains, family members would sometimes sit on the old porch where Xavier and Katherine had spent so many hours together, and they would feel the presence of that enduring love, still there, still strong, still reminding them of what truly mattered. This was their legacy, not just land or cattle or prosperity, but love. Deep, abiding, chosen everyday love. The kind of love that catches you when you fall and holds you up forever after. The kind of love that builds homes and families and futures. The kind of love that endures beyond death, beyond time, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone it touches. And so the story ended where it began, with a woman collapsing from exhaustion and a man catching her, with words spoken in care and concern that became the foundation of everything that followed. The ranch foreman saw her collapse from exhaustion. He said she had worked enough for today, and in doing so, he set in motion a love story that would echo through generations. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life begin not with grand gestures but with simple kindness, with seeing someone truly, with choosing to care. Their graves sat side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, the inscription simple. Xavier and Katherine Ward. They built a legacy of love. And every spring, wildflowers would bloom around those graves, tended by children and grandchildren who remembered, who carried the story forward, who understood that what their ancestors had built was more than just a successful ranch. It was proof that love, real and true and lasting, was not just a fairy tale but something that could be grasped, held, nurtured, and passed down through the ages like the most precious inheritance of all.